troubling economic news for Canada. New numbers show the economy is taking a hit, shrinking under the weight of outside forces.
December 23, 2025. Statistics Canada reported the Canadian economy shrank by 0.3% in October, the largest drop in almost 3 years. Analysts had forecast growth would dip by only 0.2%. Canada missed expectations and the economy performed worse than the worst predictions. But October wasn't the first warning sign. In Q2 2025, GDP declined 0.4%, the first contraction in 7 quarters and the largest, excluding the pandemic, in 9 years. On a seasonally adjusted annualized basis, Q2 saw GDP decline 1.6% compared to 2024. Statistics Canada revised Q2 figures downward from a 1.6% decline to a 1.8% decline. So it was actually worse than initially reported. June marked the third consecutive monthly decline following contractions in April and May, 3 straight months of contraction. Then October erased September's 0.2% gain, sending the economy back into negative territory. This is happening right now. December 2025. And as we close out this year, Canada's economy isn't just slowing, it's contracting repeatedly despite government claims of resilience. Because Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem warned the Canada-US trade war would put the economy on a permanently lower path with lower consumption and income levels. Permanently lower, not temporary, not cyclical, permanently lower economic output. I'm going to break down exactly what's happening: the repeated GDP contractions, the manufacturing collapse, the export crisis, the Q3 rebound that economists warn is fake, the scramble to avoid official recession, because this isn't just weak growth, this is the beginning of economic decline. But first, if you want to understand what's really happening to Canada's economy without the government spin, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Hit that subscribe button right now. Your subscription helps us expose the truth about Canada's economic crisis. Alright, let's start with October's disaster. Canada's GDP fell 0.3% in October, more than offsetting September's 0.2% increase. The manufacturing sector led the declines with a 1.5% drop. Machinery manufacturing was down 6.9% and contributed the most to the category's negative output. Manufacturing of wood products dropped 7.3%, the largest decline since April 2020. Sawmills and wood preservation productivity fell 9%. Wood products down 7.3%. Sawmills down 9%. That's the lumber tariff crisis translating directly into GDP collapse. Statistics Canada said October's weakness in wood manufacturing and its subsectors were following the announcement from the US government of additional tariffs on Canadian lumber effective October 14th. Tariffs. Again, every single GDP decline traces back to Trump's trade war. BMO senior economist Robert Kavchich wrote, "All told, this is pretty soft momentum to start off Q4. Given that initial data for November pointed to modest growth for the next month, it looks like the Canadian economy has some work cut out to avoid another negative print for the final quarter of the year. That will close out a very choppy year for Canadian growth in still choppy fashion. Canada might avoid technical recession by threading a needle, posting just enough growth in November and December to offset October's contraction. But that's not economic strength. That's barely staying above water. Now let's talk about Q2 2025. Because that's when the economy really fell apart. Real GDP declined 0.4% in Q2 2025 following a 0.5% gain in Q1. The contraction was driven by significant declines in the export of goods and decreased business investment in machinery and equipment. Export volumes plunged 7.5% in Q2. Merchandise exports fell 9.2% while service exports were down 1.4%. Exports, Canada's economic engine, down 7.5% in one quarter. Lower shipments of cars and light trucks, consumer goods, industrial machinery and parts, intermediate metal products, building and packaging materials, and travel services contributed to the decline. Everything Canada exports to the US, hammered. Business investment in machinery and equipment fell 9.4%. When businesses stop investing in equipment, they're signaling they don't expect future growth. They're hunkering down. On a seasonally adjusted annualized basis, Q2 2025 saw GDP decline 1.6% compared to 2024, later revised to a 1.8% decline. That means if the Q2 contraction continued for a full year, Canada's economy would shrink by nearly 2%, Now let's talk about the monthly declines that led to Q2's collapse. April 2025, GDP shrank 0.1%. The manufacturing sector alone dipped 1.9%, the steepest drop since April 2021. Transportation equipment manufacturing was hit hard, attributed to uncertainty caused by the trade war in the auto industry as car manufacturers pulled back on production in response to Trump's tariff on vehicle exports. May 2025, GDP showed a 0.1% decline. Most of the May GDP decline was explained by temporary disruptions to oil extraction due to wildfires, with the manufacturing sector partially retracing a large April decline. Retail trade contributed significantly to the overall GDP decline with a drop of 1.2%. Motor vehicles and parts dealers drove most of the retail drop. June 2025, GDP fell 0.1%, the third consecutive monthly decline. Goods-producing industries contracted by 0.5%, led by slowdowns in manufacturing and utilities. 11 out of 20 sectors showed declines. 3 consecutive months of GDP contraction. April, May, June. That's a quarter of economic shrinkage. Now here's where the government tries to spin good news. Q3 2025. Real GDP increased 0.6% in Q3 2025, after falling 0.5% in Q2. On an annualized basis, the economy grew 2.6%, well above the Bank of Canada's projection of 0.5%. Sounds great, right? Canada avoided recession. Economy bouncing back. Not so fast. Let's look at what economists actually said about this growth. Bradley Saunders, North America economist at Capital Economics, said in a note that the import-led growth in Q3 masks underlying weakness in domestic demand. The drop-off in household spending was the largest quarterly decline outside the pandemic in almost 2 decades. The declines in household consumption and business investment, along with the weak preliminary GDP estimate for October, demonstrate how the economy is struggling for momentum. Tony Stillo, head of Canada Economics at Oxford Economics, and senior economist Michael Davenport said, "Headline growth was flattered by a large drop in imports, which masked underlying weakness in domestic demand as households and businesses spent less. We still think the Canadian economy is in a fragile position and expect it will struggle to grow in the near term amid U.S. tariffs, elevated trade policy uncertainty." So what actually drove Q3's growth? Imports fell 2.2%, the largest drop since Q4 2022. Exports edged up only 0.2%, a mathematical trick. When imports fall faster than exports, GDP calculation shows growth, even when the underlying economy is weakening. BMO chief economist Douglas Porter wrote the Q3 report is a veritable mixed bag, with a much stronger headline figure, but a flash estimate of a 0.3% contraction for October GDP. Overall final domestic demand was flat in Q3, so the stronger than expected rebound in headline GDP more so reflects a mathematical boost from falling imports rather than underlying economic strength. And here's the kicker. What drove the government spending increase? An 82% surge in spending on weapon systems. The Canadian economy avoided technical recession largely due to a surge in defense spending. Canada avoided recession because the government bought weapons. That's the economic strength behind Q3. Meanwhile, household final consumption expenditure fell 0.1% in Q3. Business capital investment was flat. Spending by Canadians abroad fell 3.9%. Canadians spending less, businesses not investing. That's not recovery. That's stagnation masked by accounting tricks. Now let's talk about what's happening to Canadian workers. Labor Force Survey reported a decline of 66,000 jobs, 0.3% in August, with unemployment rising to 7.1%, the highest since August 2021. Payroll employment decreased by 0.2% in June. Ontario's manufacturing sector has shed approximately 20,600 jobs over the past 2 years. Ontario's Financial Accountability Office says the manufacturing sector has been put under increased pressure because of the trade war. Ontario's real GDP growth decreased by 0.6% during Q2 due to a significant drop in exports and sharply lower business investment. The FAO projects Ontario's real GDP growth will slow to 0.9% for 2025. Jobs disappearing, unemployment rising, GDP contracting, manufacturing collapsing. That's the economic cocktail for recession. Now let's talk about GDP per capita, because that's where it gets really ugly. Real GDP per capita fell 0.5% in Q2, offsetting the 0.3% increase in Q1. Per capita growth was down 0.3% on a year-over-year basis and has been below its pre-pandemic baseline for 8 consecutive quarters. 8 consecutive quarters of GDP per capita below pre-pandemic levels. That means the average Canadian is poorer now than they were in late 2019, 2 years of pandemic, 4 years of recovery, and Canadians are still worse off. On a per capita basis, GDP increased 0.5% in Q3, after falling 0.5% the previous quarter. So Q3 just got Canadians back to where they were before Q2, still below pre-pandemic levels. Real gross domestic income, a measure of purchasing power of domestic production, fell 0.7% in Q2 as terms of trade deteriorated. Canadians can afford less with their income. Business labor productivity fell 1.0% in Q2 after edging down 0.1% in Q1. Labor productivity was flat on a year-over-year basis. Productivity, the key to long-term prosperity, going backward. Now let's talk about household finances, because Canadians are getting squeezed. Wages and salaries edged up 0.2% in Q2, the lowest quarterly pace since 2016, excluding declines early in the pandemic. The household saving rate fell 1 percentage point to 5.0% as growth in nominal consumption outpaced income gains. Wages barely growing, savings rate falling. Canadians are spending down savings just to maintain living standards. Compensation of employees edged up 0.2% in Q2, the smallest increase since Q2 2016 aside from pandemic declines. Worker compensation is stagnant while costs keep rising. Now let's talk about what economists are warning about 2026. If 25% tariffs remain in place, Oxford Economics estimates Canada's GDP could fall 2.5% peak to trough by early 2026. Inflation would surge to 7.2% by mid-2025, and 150,000 layoffs would lift unemployment to 7.9% by year-end. CIBC estimates that 25% tariffs with retaliation could reduce GDP by about 5%. Long-lasting tariffs could bring Canada into a material recession on the order of magnitude of the 2008-09 financial crisis shock. RBC warns that tariffs would likely reduce real GDP growth to 0 in 2025 if implemented beyond a year, and lead to a 2% contraction in 2026, with a peak unemployment rate more than 8%. BC's Ministry of Finance estimates job losses of 124,000 by 2028, with the largest declines in natural resource sector export industries and associated manufacturing. Unemployment could increase to 6.7% in 2025 and 7.1% in 2026. Annual revenues could be reduced by between $1.6 billion and $2.5 billion. National Bank reported that the Bank of Canada's estimate of the Canadian GDP impact would exceed that of any previous recession, barring the temporary setback at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. Here's the bottom line as we close out 2025. October GDP fell 0.3%, largest drop in nearly 3 years. Q2 GDP contracted 0.4%, revised to 0.5%, then revised again to a 1.8% annualized decline. April, May, June, 3 consecutive monthly declines. Exports plunged 7.5% in Q2, manufacturing down 1.5% in October alone. Wood products collapsed 7.3%, business investment in machinery down 9.4%, GDP per capita below pre-pandemic levels for 8 straight quarters. Unemployment hit 7.1%, highest since August 2021. 66,000 jobs lost in August. Ontario manufacturing shed 20,600 jobs over 2 years. Labor productivity fell 1.0% in Q2. Wages grew only 0.2%, slowest since 2016. Household saving rate fell to 5.0%. Q3 growth driven by falling imports and weapons purchases, not real economic strength. Canada's economy is in crisis. Whether it officially meets the technical definition of recession or not, the lived reality for Canadians is economic decline. Make sure you're subscribed, because 2026 will determine whether Canada slides into official recession or manages to scrape by with near zero growth. Either way, prosperity isn't returning. Governor Macklem warned the economy is on a permanently lower path. That's the Bank of Canada admitting Canada's economic potential has been permanently damaged by the trade war. The government can spin the numbers. They can celebrate Q3's weapons-driven growth. They can avoid the recession label by 1/10 of a percentage point. But they can't change reality. GDP contracting repeatedly, exports collapsing, manufacturing in free fall, jobs disappearing, wages stagnant, productivity declining. The economy is falling apart. Ottawa is scrambling. And 2026 looks worse, not better. This story is far from over. Stay tuned.